So first focus is growing pains, and we're going to see America's growth from those 13 initial colonies over to the west. So as I said, initially the British territories, but British lost the War of Independence. 230 million acres of Indian lands who had fought for the British were immediately handed over. Not many morals in that. We have the Northwest Territory up here, and then the Southwest Territory down here. Now the Northwest Territory was won partly as a series of wars against the Native Americans, against the Indians at the Battle of Fallen Timbers and the Treaty of Greenville, which led to the new states of, let's see if we can find this, Ohio, just here, and Indiana to the west of it, and then we've got Illinois, and then we've got Michigan up here. And in the Southwest, immediately their frontiersmen had set up their farms in the areas of Kentucky, in Tennessee, in Mississippi, and in Alabama. So there we have the divide between the Northwest and the Southwest territories. Okay, initial gaining of the land. What we're going to see is slowly the Americans head westwards across this plains. First of all, they'll head directly for the direct West Plains, and then we're going to see this middle ground eaten up as well. But before we get there, first of all, Thomas Jefferson, third president, created many systems to try and sell as much land as possible. The idea was that small farmers could do it, but actually the $640 required to buy a section was actually most often swallowed up by land speculators. They've got capitalism at work. They also were helped by 10% discount for cash payments, and they made big profits. An absolute ridiculous bit of capitalism again with the Louisiana Purchase. French territory of Louisiana, which is this whole purple area down here, is sold to the Americans for just $15 million with 530 million acres, and that later on we get a smaller territory of Louisiana, but that's a huge purchase they've made there. And then we got the American pioneering spirit with Lewis and Clark, with the Corps of Discovery expedition. They failed to find their aimed river route to the Pacific, but the maps they used were used by fur traders, and eventually we see these maps lead to exploring further issues later on. We have to say at this point trade grew rapidly with very few problems until 1814. Right, here is the key issue of slavery. So slavery was being phased out in the northernmost states, but it continued in the southern states of Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia. Now, because the population is growing in the north and the size of your population gives you votes, it was argued it was unfair to count the slaves as votes. The compromise was reached where each slave would count as 3/5 of a person, a population. Make that of what you will in terms of morals. Many in the north thought this was given into the southern slaveholders, so it gave them that extra little bit of sway. And again, here's the tension, the battle between democracy and getting one up on the opponents. So slavery was banned in these northwest territories, permitted in the southwest territories, and what we get then is immediately we see new cotton plantations open up in this area over here, the deep south, and because of that we get increased sales of slaves in these areas over here, the initial colonies. So much money is actually being made that they actually start kidnapping free black people from the north, take them to the south to make them slaves. That was how much profit could be made. Now slavery is going to be part of this multi-billion-dollar industry of cotton, helped by the invention of Eli Whitney's cotton gin, separating the cotton. You see it in the picture in the top right there, and increasingly plantation owners are using the pushing system, where you really push the slaves to pick at the speed of the fastest picker. The slavery really helps this area known as the Cotton Kingdom. So that's those southern slaves, those deep south states. We got New Orleans at the center of this, tripling in size, Cotton becomes 42% of all US exports, and slaves are brought in for the plantations. Now we've got an interesting issue because morally in the North this is a problem. America's still expanding. What will happen to these new states? So what they get is the Missouri Compromise, and you can see Missouri marked on the map. And the Missouri Compromise says that slavery was allowed in Missouri itself and anything south of it. So you can see the dotted line along here. Whilst anything to the north and to the west of it wouldn't allow slavery. And what we now get is slavery is now added. States are now added with one slave state and one free state at a time. So Missouri is added at the same time as the free state of Maine, and that's the way of maintaining that balance. I said before about the dog-eat-dog world. We've got North versus South, each trying to get one up on each other. So this is a way of compromising. There is, however, an increased concern about slaves. There's rebellions at Saint-Dominique, part successful uprising in New Orleans by Charles Deslandes. But we got to remember, even in the North, there's a real fear of revolt and what would happen if all of a sudden these slaves won their right to vote. Many Northerners themselves are divided. Some want total ban of slavery, abolitionists. We got some who set up a colonization society so that free slaves could go to a home in Africa. Some helped slave revolts, and some were terrified and didn't know how to solve the issue. Now all this leaves out the fact we've got a terrible human story going on at this time. So you can see some horrible facts and figures there about children of slaves often separated, often without any family at all. Look at that figures there about the amount of children separated from their families, an average age of 9 years old. But money talks, capitalism talks, and even in the North, lots of money is being made by factories and land prospectors. And then you throw into the mix the fact that the president was a Southerner and a supporter of slavery, and he actually encouraged banks, including banks from Britain, by the way, to lend larger sums of money to invest even further in this industry, which grew a lot of money, but of course caused a lot of human misery. And of course there's the other human tragedy of the treatment of the Native Americans, the Indians in the East. So Northwest Territory is open to settlement, Southern Territory from 1790, and a lot of those tribes that live there, what we're going to see happen is a lot of those tribes flee from the settlers and they go over towards the west. Now that's okay for those, but for the tribes in this southern area here, and I'll mark it on the big map in this area here, and we can see it in this area here, where they've got states been created around them, so they're trapped in with the Atlantic Ocean on the one side of them and white settlers on the other. So tribes like the Creeks and the Seminoles fought costly wars and often they're forced to give over territory. So they try a different way. So they try to adapt. So we got the Cherokees modeling the US system. We get a newspaper, we get the alphabet, we've got the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, the Seminoles. They open schools and churches, and they become what's known as the 5 civilized tribes. Now that sounds all very good, and what more can they do? But unfortunately this doesn't save their homelands. President Andrew Jackson, and I'll leave you to make up your own views on him personally. He passed the Indian Removal Act in 1830, basically saying you sell your land or else. Under pressure, the Choctaws, Chickasaws, Creeks sign and they start moving westwards to newly declared Indian Territory. Now they try to put up a little bit of a fight. So the Cherokees, they use various methods. The Cherokees take the state of Georgia to the Supreme Court. The judge there, Judge Marshall, says you're a distinct political society, but you're depending on the government who will act in your interest. President Jackson's furious about this. They haven't really given much away, but Jackson's furious and told the state government of Georgia to ignore the Supreme Court and to continue the settlement of Cherokee lands, ignoring one of the bodies that's supposed to provide safety and fairness. The Seminoles fight back, and after being defeated, the US forces capture and imprison Chief Osceola he was actually on the way to a peace meeting, and he's imprisoned. Again, there's a dog eat dog, we'll get one up on you type approach. A third war occurs, leaving the Seminole population at 200 in Florida, so that was hardly worth that. It's a Pyrrhic victory, which means a bit of a pointless one. They've not gained an awful lot. The Creeks tried to sign a treaty, try and see if they can make a bit of money. Land speculators basically take the mick, offer them tiny sums of money, and then squatters simply come in and take over their land. Creeks, understandably, are unhappy about this. They start stealing livestock and crops. Some do revert to murder and arson in revenge, and war is declared. And by 1837, that's not worked because 15,000 had to be moved westward. Cherokee, apart their leaders sign a treaty, but the whole population, almost the whole population, reject it. The US sees this as great ingratitude. 7,000 troops forced the 18,000 Cherokees into concentration camps, and then a atrocious 3-month winter march, which historians have estimated 4,000 to 5,000 Cherokees died in what became known as the Trail of Tears. So by 1838, the Jackson government, and that's not a real $20. He is on the $20, but that's a Mickey take of it. It's a Native American. They've removed 46,000 Indians from the land. They've made treaties, and they've opened up 25 million acres east of the Mississippi to white settlements and to slavery, at expense, of course, of the Native Americans.